Ladies and gentlemen, good morning and welcome to this panel, during which we will discuss the role of early warning systems in building a climate response capacity. In 10 years, climate and weather-related disasters have claimed more than 400,000 lives worldwide. It is estimated that 1 in every 70 people in the world are caught up in disasters and and need humanitarian protection and assistance. And therefore, there is a need to build systems and response that can help these people. But most of all, there is the need to prepare and to prevent and to have actions that reduce the impact of these events. Unfortunately, the future is not very rose. Science has been very clear. There is no doubt that climate-related events will become more numerous and they will become more impactful. So we can really expect that we will see more sea rise and also we will see more drought and more fires and more floods. And to all this, ask for action from all of us. Of course, these events have cascading effect. We can expect science here also. The IPCC is very clear in identifying the follow-up risk linked to health issues, linked to food safety issues, linked also to conflict probably, because they can exacerbate displacement, migration, but also the social, economic, and environmental stress. So what can we do? What is the action that can be done? Well, the whole forum here is designed to provide an answer to this. But this panel wants to discuss how early warning system can help. And I think it is one of the most important topics to address because REPLY is well organized. There are resources. It's really working well. We can always improve, but it's working well. But early warning really is something we can still improve and we can still organize in different, better manners. And that's what the panel will discuss today. But what is an early warning system? Early warning system is an ecosystem of tools, of data, of information, but also it involves communication, preparedness, awareness raising, training, capacity building. It's really an ensemble of tools and of means and of capacity that is provided to policy makers, practitioners, local communities, down to citizens, very important, to prepare and to be able to enhance the resilience of the communities to disasters and also to climate change and to these weather-related events. Now, by now you're probably wondering, who am I to tell you all these things? I am the head of unit of the disaster risk management team at the Joint Research Center of the European Commission. We, by definition, do science, and we also do science to enhance the early warning systems. We are fine-tuning the use of Earth observation data to move from a monitoring of events to an understanding of the reasons behind these events and how to react faster. And we are used to study complex disasters, complex systems, their cascading effects, like fires. We just published yesterday a report on the 2021 fire season and the consequences of these fires. But we don't only do science, we develop technologies. We operate GDAX, which is the Global Disaster Alert and Coordination System, which for years now provide information, whole information on disasters and probably impact of these disasters. And we have a wide community working with us and also benefiting of this information. And we operate the Copernicus Emergency Management System, which is going more and more global, covering drought, fires, floods all over the world, and of course in Europe, and also providing maps that help authorities to better look into these disasters and are one of the best early warning systems. We work with many partners, and some of them are here with me today. We are used to join forces with other partners and organizations to do also capacity building. And therefore, I'm particularly happy today to moderate this discussion, because I am, by experience, convinced that early warning has to improve, has to go further to save more lives and to prepare Europe and world for these events that are in front of us, and to help save lives, but also protect the environment, protect the buildings, protect culture, protect nature. So let's see who is with me today and who is going to help me in this discussion. We have Marco Anzidei, who is a senior researcher at the National Institute of Geophysics and Volcanology in Italy. And he should be here somewhere because he is connecting. Hi, yes. Hello.
Hello, hi, good morning everybody, I'm here.
And then my presence here today, Carlo Buontempo, Director of the Copernicus Climate Change Service at the European Centre for Medium Range Weather Forecast. Welcome, Carlo. We have John Harding, Head of the Climate Risk and Early Warning System Initiative at the World Meteorological Organization. Very pleased to have you here, John, today. We have François Kaitakire, Director of Research and Development Department at the African Risk Capacity, and a former JRC colleague also. We have first of all, Catalina, Team Leader for Climate Risk and Conflict Areas at International Red Cross Red Crescent Climate Center. Nice to have you here, Catalina. And last but certainly not least, Rickleff Beutin, Director General for Crisis Prevention, Stabilization, Peace Building and Humanitarian Assistance at the German Foreign Office. We kick off with Marco. And Marco, I would like to ask you about seawater level rise. We know that with climate change, this is certainly one of the risks and hazards that we will see increasing. Can you, Marco, tell us more, some insights, I hope so, because I don't see Marco, some insights of the possible impact of sea level rise in coastal hazards, such as tsunami and coastal flooding. And also, we would like to hear from you, how you think that early warning systems can help for this, and what should be done to improve this?
Yeah, okay, thank you for the question. So what we know is that warming is unprecedented in the last 2,000 years. So we are living in a warming planet, and the problem is that the warming planet is causing the expansion of the oceans, the thermal expansion of the ocean, and the melting of the ice sheets. So this means that sea level is rising at a rate of about more than 30 centimeters per century, but it's accelerating. That means that by the end of this century, we may experience a sea level rise of about 1 meter in the worst case of climatic scenario. And this is really an hazard for the coastal population, because we know that more than 400 million of people are living along the coast. So this is a problem for many coastal cities, for small villages, and for the environment, because many coastal plains located at low elevations above the present sea level are at risk of flooding. For example, in the Mediterranean, there are more than 163 coastal plains that are exposed to sea level rise and flooding. And in addition, in the sea level rise condition, tsunamis will be more severe in the next decades, with an amplification of the effect. So the run-up effect will be amplified, maybe 2 or 3 or maybe more times. We don't know exactly. We are trying to estimate the effect of the enhanced effect of tsunamis along the coast. So for this reason, it's important to prepare people to face the next changes along the coast, and preparedness is very important, and also to raise awareness on people living on the coast on this problem.
Thank you. Thank you, Marco. I would like to now pass to Carlo. And Carlo, I would like to ask you, what do you think about free and open access to climate data? How can this improve resilience and readiness of third countries?
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here with you today, and thank you for the invitation. And I feel to be a bit of a fish out of water here, because I'm not working for a humanitarian organization. I work for ECNWF, which is an organization with a terrible acronym, but stands for European Center for Medium Range Weather Forecast, and we do weather forecast. In particular, I'm responsible for the Copernicus Climate Change Service. So we provide data, and this data, I'll try to convince you, is very important. So linking back to what was said during the introduction, we now know that climate is indeed changing, and we have been saying that for the last 2 decades, probably, with strong statements, every year a bit stronger. And we know that this actually has a direct impact on a series of extremes that are relevant for humanitarian disaster. I'm thinking about droughts, flooding, and the like. So there are 2 strands to this. One is the mitigation, and I think there is a moral obligation to do something for the generation to come. But I'm not here to tell you about that. There is the other element, and it's really very much about adaptation. So no matter how good we are at meeting the Paris Agreement target, and we are not particularly good at the moment, but even if we were good, there are changes that are inevitable and we will not be able to counteract. So sea level rise, we were mentioning a minute ago, is one of those. The impact on sea level rise will continue not just a few decades, it will continue several centuries ahead. So we need to adapt. So the second element I want to bring here is a parallel to what has happened with COVID. I think something that helped us psychologically, but also practically informing our decision, was the availability of data on the rate of diffusion, on the contagion, and so on. So data has been proven useful in many other contexts, and is definitely useful in the context of climate. When preparing for this intervention, I was thinking of listing the way in which we use climate data in humanitarian context. And then I decided to do the opposite, and borrowing from Albert Einstein, the concept of Gedanken experiment. Let's assume we have none, no climate information whatsoever, right? Well, think about being in the aftermath of a major disaster. Is this normal? Has it happened before? We wouldn't be able to say. Is going to happen again in the next few months? We wouldn't be able to say. Is part of a longer term trend. Should I spend that amount of money to prepare for it, or is it money bad spent? So even just analyzing the current status, understanding whether the current status of a climate driver has exceeded a critical threshold or not, would be impossible. And if we look farther down the line, if we think about, as it has been mentioned in many other sessions before, the small island state, for instance, or if you look at these existential threats, then we also need information about the long term. So, climate change, has been said, often is a threat multiplier, and definitely affect every single phase of the disaster risk reduction paradigm. So the preparedness, the prevention, the recovery, and the response. And even the recovery and the response, even actually in that phase, the climate information is essential. So there was one element that came out quite strongly, in my opinion, from the publication of the Working Group 2 ERA 6 report, and was this concept of maladaptation. So doing something with a good intention, but actually leading to opposite result. I think a good antidote to that maladaptation is really to trust the data we have and to ensure this data is useful. So I don't think I need to spend too many words to convince you that climate data is essential in this context. So the second part of my statement here is almost a logical, well, without almost, is a logical conclusion from the first. If climate data is fundamental in informing our decision, then I think we have a moral obligation to ensure that this data is open and free for anyone to use. So it would be hard to justify not to make this data available, and unwise, in my opinion, in the long term. So I would like really to close on a positive note, because something that is not necessarily easy when we talk about climate change. But in this context, I think Europe has done a lot and is in a leading position. I think that the Copernicus program in particular, and has been mentioned for the emergency management, but also for the climate change, is in a unique position worldwide. Nowhere else in the world we have seen such a concrete and coordinated effort to free up data, to make more data about the past, the present, and the future climate available to everyone on the world without restriction. So this data is being used already. My deputy director is today at another meeting discussing about the Green Deal and showing how the information coming from the Copernicus program actually underpin the Green Deal. And this is working for the Green Deal. This works for all sorts of policies and certainly all sorts of action and humanitarian action in particular. So I'm very proud when I look at the number we have. We respond to 500,000 requests of data per day. And we deliver some 100,000 of terabyte of data to the user all over the world. So this is something we can build upon. And I really look forward for all our action, and the humanitarian action in particular, to continue to be based on evidence, and for programs such as Copernicus to provide this evidence. Thank you very much.
Very much, Carlo. And yes, indeed, Copernicus is a champion in making data available. And later on, I will ask you some examples of how third countries are using this data to build their own early warning, or to integrate into their early warning systems, and how this data is used by them to strengthen their capacity at local level. And talking about national and local levels, I would now like to turn to John. John, I would like to ask you if you have practical examples of how the WMO contributes to reinforce national and local forecasts with their work. And before you start giving us these examples, we have people in the room here, but we have a lot of people also connected online. And there is a slide of possibility to ask questions to all our panelists. So I invite everybody to connect and to ask questions through Slido too. And then we will put the questions to you. John, please.
Thank you, Alessandra, and thank you for the European Commission and France for this opportunity. It's really a pleasure to be here today. If you call it you're a fish out of the water, so am I. So we're in the same pond. I also come at this from a meteorological perspective, and I think to understand how we contribute to the early warning system, and I think for the humanitarian community to see how it works, we in WMO we basically look at we provide part of the global architecture. I think you've understood this from Carlos's comments, and we look at it from an infrastructure side and from a services side. So from the infrastructure side, it's the data policies, which are extremely important. It's basically ensuring that all these observation monitoring systems speak to each other, are interoperable. And the way we do that, we work through our members to set up global centers. So these are centers that provide the right type of computing capacity to provide these very advanced prediction systems. So ECMWF, these are kind of acronyms just roll off my tongue. ECMWF is one of these global centers that provide these type of services, and we also have regional centers. So both when it comes to meteorological events, so extreme events, or with longer range forecasts, so the climate seasonal events, we have a series of global centers, a series of regional centers, and so these predictions are cascaded down and made available to the countries, hopefully in a way that they can then use these to warn the population of either imminent events, short-term events, or longer-term longer-term events and impacts. And that's basically how the system is globally set up from an infrastructure perspective. If then obviously there's then the services side of the equation. We talk about early warning systems, and here we use a lot of there's terms that we use a lot, and you'll hear a lot, and they basically all mean the same thing. We talk about end-to-end early warning systems, or early action, risk-informed, people-centered, last mile. Some people say first mile. All these terms, impact-based is one that we use a lot. Huh? So warnings that warn of the impacts of events rather than the events themselves. They all basically mean the same things, these terms. It's that we recognize that even when we provide the best science, the best predictions, the early warning would only be effective if the people who need that information understand the information, are part of the equation from the start, and take the appropriate action based on that information. And so that's very much how we anchor this service component of our work, and that obviously goes well beyond the institutions that for example, I work with, or the National Meteorological Institutions. It means working with a wider set of actors, and obviously the humanitarian actors are a very important part of that work. So, if I had to come up with maybe three points which I think are important for humanitarian actors when it comes to engaging in early warning systems, because I imagine you're thinking, okay, you describe this very nice global system. The country where I'm working in, we're not seeing these high quality products. These are the countries, obviously, where there's more humanitarian crisis. You're probably trying to develop anticipatory action or anticipatory financing mechanisms and so on, and you're not seeing this data necessarily arriving in the right format for you to define thresholds for payouts and so on. So there are a number of gaps and challenges here. And one of the biggest gaps that we have is that we have a very big capacity gap between some of the more advanced countries with their Met services and some of the countries in developing countries, in particularly least developed countries and smaller independent states. And in these countries, they do have a real challenge in providing the right type of prediction services, climate data, or others. So we need to build that gap. That's something we have to engage in together. I currently had a financing mechanism called CRUISE, Climate Risk Early Warning Systems. We're supported by a number of countries, governments, including governments on this panel, who are trying to take a common approach to building the capacity of the countries to provide the right type of data information to support early warning action. So, this is, I think, what we would like to see is, when you're a humanitarian actor working in a country, you have a choice. You can either go and get that data from a global or regional institutions, or you can build through the national institutions in those countries and help them understand what are your data needs, and that contributes to the long-term capacity building of those countries. And this is something that we're keen on, and a message we're keen to transmit in this kind of fora. Last year, towards the end of the year, we worked with ARC, and François was very involved in that in Niger, where we basically brought together the national institutions who provide climate and weather data and services, so National Meteorological Service, Hydrological Service, and we brought together all the actors who use that information as part of either their risk-sharing insurance schemes, like ARC, but there were also a lot of the humanitarian actors there, the National Red Cross Society in Niger, and they use that information to take anticipatory financing action, and they also then need that information. So we built a dialogue between those national institutions so they can understand what kind of information and data they need in what format, and therefore it helps build those capacities. And I hope that's something that we'd like to see scaled up. I'll reiterate our interest to work more with ARC on this, but other actors around the table, and it's something we'd like to see more of. Maybe one other point is that when we're building these national systems, early warning systems, there are still parts of the let's say the users, potential users of those systems that we're not reaching out to. And one example of the type of populations that these national systems are not speaking to, for example, is displaced populations. And there again, the humanitarian actors who are active in these countries can have an important role to play. I took the train here, and so I had a bit of time on my hands. So I took the countries where we're working through CRUISE, so the financing we're providing, it's over 40 countries, and I went to the IDMC website, and I literally just added up the number of displaced population in those countries to get an idea of how many people currently we're not actually providing warnings to through our work. And it's just by adding up those, and it probably is a wrong methodology there, but anyway, just by adding up those numbers, there were 19 million displaced people in the countries that we're working in currently. And I know that currently our systems that we're building in those countries are not speaking to those kind of audiences. We don't have the right channels of communication, maybe not in the right languages to actually reach those people. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done now in building these national systems and reaching out to those audiences. And that's another, I think, strong link that we can do through the work we do with the humanitarian community. So I'll stop here, Alessandra, but I think I hope that I got the message across. There's a lot of things that we can do better by working across our respective communities to build up these early warning systems.
And we will have to do it. Yes, John. And thanks also for passing so strong the message, the need for capacity building, because here we have the donors in this room and probably also online, and we definitely need to increase and enhance capacity building. We already do a lot, but there is really a need to make sure that we have more people capable at the local level, the national level, of using the data, as we heard before from Carlo, but also using the systems that exist, and also help us to ensure that the early warning systems become weather and climate proof, because this is really what is need to be accelerated now. So we come back to this, but first we want to hear from Francois, because Francois has a direct experience in working with third countries in this context of early warning. And we would like to hear from you, Francois, a bit of this experience, if you want to share it with us, concerning in particular African countries, how they take or can take a more proactive approach in developing or using early warning systems. And what do you think are the mechanisms that can help? Because we are all involved, engaged with these countries, but somehow we have to orchestrate all this in a manner that it is impactful. Are we impactful with these countries and early warning systems?
Thank you. Thank you, Alessandra. I think I will try now to be the bridge between this side and that side, because we're actually taking data produced by those guys and putting them into our models and predicting the impact. And based on that impact, we're proposing to countries to take insurance so that when there is a disaster, they can timely have access to finance and then respond with the humanitarian action in the field. So we are helping countries to get immediate finance after the disasters. Because we are working for African countries. The African Risk Capacity is a specialized agency of the African Union. And we have 35 member states. All those 35 member states have some similar characteristic, which is actually constraints on the budget. They cannot put aside money for responding to humanitarian crises. So usually when there is a crisis, most of the countries will turn to humanitarian aid to aid from abroad. So the African Risk Capacity Agency was actually built to provide these mechanisms so that the countries can have predictable finance funding. So these mechanisms, and then countries can now concentrate on other businesses, so they can know that they will have at least some money to respond to the humanitarian crisis. At the same time, country can take insurance, but we provide also mechanisms for humanitarian organizations to take the same insurance with the same terms used by the government. So what we call the replica mechanism. So that's why I'm saying that we can make the bridge, because the Red Cross so far has not taken an insurance from ARC, but we have the World Food Program and the Starting Network, who are actually our regular clients taking the insurance from ARC. In terms of early warning, actually the experience that I have seen, as also John said, is sometimes the lack of local capacity. That's one thing. So what we are trying to do is also to build the local capacity. So we have technical working groups in all the member states where we operate. The first thing that we do is to train them in using our tools, because we take this data and we build our models. We have our software tools to help countries to use them for early warning, especially for the drought risk, being in agricultural areas and also pastoral areas. We are using different models. And also we have also a mechanism for the tropical cyclone. So we're taking forecast from the meteorological organizations and building the model to estimate the expected impact of the cyclone. I think that is something which is very important actually, because you have a cyclone forecast. People know that how much the wind and where the cyclone will land. But what you need to know for the government and for international organizations, humanitarian organizations, is to know how many people will be affected, and for the government, what are expected economic losses due to this event. And then they can also plan for intervention, but also for reconstruction later on. So we provide this mechanism. Now we are developing also the mechanism to provide early warning on flood risk. We are now targeting 15 countries. We have started with 6 countries, where also we have collaboration with the World Meteorological Organization. Then with those mechanisms put in place, in this case we are responding to a post-disaster. It's a post-disaster response. But we are also in discussion with some organizations, including the Red Cross Society, to have the anticipatory action. So that actually if we forecast a disaster, there can be actions before the disaster happens. Sometimes we think in terms of prepositioning, elements for interventions, like for the cyclone. But for instance, for the drought risk, we have discovered that when the season starts badly, we know that already the farmers who did not manage to plant will suffer anyhow at the end of the season. So now we are trying to have interventions just before the end of the season. When we know that the planting season has failed, then we can have intervention. Already now, we know some countries will have a payout at the end of the season. So we can now actually link to the humanitarian organization, link to the government. They can start preparing for interventions. In terms of making countries collaborate, we bring together, sometimes we organize what we call regional forum of our member states, West Africa and Eastern and Southern Africa, so that countries can share the experience in terms of using our models, using early warning systems. What we have discovered is that when you have this kind of exchange among countries, the people tend to trust better the system, because they can hear from testimony from other countries. So it's not like coming as an expert and telling them, this is very good, that's something you can use. It's like that they hear from other their peers saying, we use that, we have encountered these problems, we have resolved those problems like this, and then they trust better the system. The last thing I would like to say is that I was saying that I'm trying to make the bridge, because I was before with the Joint Research Center as a scientist. Is we have the people producing complex data, like the ECMWF, and very few people are able to download data from their archive, the Mastiga, and so you need very high expertise. And the JRC from scientists who like to have the last details and uncertainty, etc. And you have the humanitarian actors in the field who want just simple information and know, is it going to be terrible, is it going to be something mild, what is going on? So what we're trying actually to do is to simplify that information and to package it so that the humanitarian actors can read it easily, can understand it, and also we can build confidence in the data we provide to humanitarian actors. So I think that from a scientific point of view, sometimes when you emphasize the difficulties in producing the data, and the users actually are afraid that they cannot trust the data. So what we try to is to actually to build confidence into that the systems from the user's perspective.
Thank you very much, Francois. Yes, confidence and systems that are easy to be used, I think, are very important elements to consider. We also do capacity building in Africa. For example, we are exporting our technology for drought monitoring to African countries, and we work with South America, helping them to establish a system similar to what we have with Copernicus to monitoring of fires. But can I ask you quickly a follow-up question? Europe is front runner in the legislation and really in our ambition to become a climate neutral continent. So we are really now this big agreement at the political level, and science and practitioners are all working towards this objective. So really climate is a very important element. A Green Deal, environmental and climate are the two pillars of this policy. This is not the same speed in other countries. But we saw in the COP, we saw the willingness of the countries to follow. My question, really quickly, a matter of curiosity, how is the willingness of third countries to bridge, to fill the gap of the capacity that is still not fully there? Is there this willingness?
Yeah, I think the willingness is there, the will is there, but the problem is that many of the countries are actually struggling with many priorities. That's one thing. And so that investing into building the capacity and training people, sometimes the government will not have really the means and the mind there. The second thing is that in terms of education and training, basic training, I think that I have discovered that actually when you have to build this capacity, you have a few people who have the basic training so that they can pick up the system and use it. And there are very few. So indeed there is competition between employers. so people moving from one organization to another. I think that something that we should actually think about is also to have this basic training at the university level, build the capacity at that level as well. Yeah. And the last thing I think is also in terms of coordination of the programs, because there will be a program for capacity building from WMO, a capacity building program from, I would say, the JRC, capacity building program from ARC, and then we have to coordinate this so that actually we don't train all the same people all the time, but at least we can share increase the impact.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Talking about bridges, you already mentioned bridges. Now it is important to see how the bridge works between science, policy making, and practitioners, because we are here also to identify possible gaps in the early warning systems and how to fill these gaps. And maybe this is something which would deserve to be looked more in detail. Is that so, Catalina? Can you tell us a bit more about this?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm very delighted to be here with all of you today, and it's just so wonderful to be again in person with many of you. So I mean, one important thing that we need to acknowledge when we talk about early warning and early action is that there is an evolution. This is not new. Like John, we have been doing this for how long? 30 years, no? And through all that process, no, there have been so much learning and so many partnerships that have been created to be able to get to the point where we are now. So I think it's really important that we understand that we come from a lot of like learning process. Yet, we know that there is a lot that we need to do. So I want to highlight in particular the relevance of the partnerships between the science community, policy community, and the practitioners, because it's what has made this evolution like so relevant, or what we have now, particularly in the Red Cross and Red Crescent, on the UN or in the NGO system, like so important. At the moment, there are like pretty much, I mean, I would say like 300 partners, that are part of this ecosystem that are trying to identify how do we translate forecast information into something that can be actionable, what are the financing systems that we can have, how we can do early action like better. There are like 3 initiatives that are very close to my heart that I want to highlight, and I think it's just very important that we know that exist and that we support them. So one is the Anticipation Hub, which was created by the International Federation of the Red Cross, the German Red Cross, supported by the German government, and the Climate Center, and is really that a space for the community of practice to exchange knowledge. There is so much knowledge that we have already in this space, and there is this really need to exchange and to learn from each other to really evolve to the point that we want to get. And that's what we want to do with the Anticipation Hub, to make sure that we have that space for all the community that is part of this. There is another very important partnership, which is the Risk-Informed Early Action Partnership, that really brings another element into the equation, the more kind of like policy aspects and the role of the government in early warning and early action, because we can't do this alone. Like really reducing risk with early action, it is, I mean, we as a humanitarians would have a very important role, but if we do it together with governments or institutions like ARC, to really able to get to the scale that is needed. So the Risk-Informed Early Action Partnership really bringing that into the equation, like bringing the governments into the center of the discussion on like, how do we advance funding? How do we advance like processes and knowledge? And then a third one, which is very new and I think just so fascinating, is called the Academic Alliance for Anticipatory Action. So it's really bringing universities from the global south to think about what is the evidence that we can develop on anticipatory action? How do we advance the science, not only from the meteorological perspective or climate perspective, but from the social science perspective, how we can really understand much better like risk in general, in different contexts, to be able to set up the systems that are fit for purpose for what we need. So those are like 3 really important things that I think are really essential. Now, of course, it is not perfect. We have evolved. We are in a really fantastic point, but we are not quite yet where we have to be able to reduce risk and to support the people that need it the most. And I'm going to quote the IPCC, the latest IPCC report, because I think for this forum is absolutely essential that we acknowledge that this is written in the IPCC report. Climate change is creating humanitarian impacts. We have talked about this for years and years and years. It was never written in the IPCC report. In the last report that was launched about 3 weeks ago, where actually the Climate Center had a big role, it is explicitly written. So thousands and thousands of scientists from all over the world wrote that statement with high confidence. So now we have that message that is very clear. So we need to figure it out how we can anticipate risk. Of course, in the long term, we need the investment in the long term to reduce risk, but we know that anticipatory action or early warning and early action give us that window of opportunity between the forecast and a shock to do something, to reduce risk, to support the most vulnerable. So we have few gaps that we really need to address, and it touched really upon the points that you mentioned and few others that are like very relevant. So one is the decision-making process to act. Like as a humanitarians, we need to know who is more likely to be impacted, when, and how. With that information, we will be able to deploy our teams to be able to do early action in the places that are really needed. So John, you mentioned like this impact-based forecasting terminology, which I'm a big fan of. I think one of the key gaps that we have, or the needs that we have, is the co-production of these impact-based forecasting systems. This is not about ECMWF just creating a forecast and then we just use it as a humanitarians, but we need to be at the table together creating that impact-based forecasting system. That meeting that you referred to, John, in Niger is so important because we need to all be together taking the decisions of like, what is the forecast that I'm going to use, why I'm going to use that forecast, who is going to be my priority population if I have a trigger for that particular event. So making that like concrete decision-making plan in advance is super essential. And I think more investment is needed in that co-production process. The second one is about the early action planning. We can have the most beautiful forecast, we can have the most amazing information in the world, but if the local organization, like the National Society or a local NGO, doesn't have the actual capacity to go and implement the actions because of lack of logistics, human resources, technical capacities, there is no early action that we can do. And this is a little bit sometimes the elephant in the room, because yes, we can have the most beautiful early warning system in the world, but if that local organization, like think about the Somali Red Crescent or the Yemen Red Crescent, that is able to go and actually implement the early action, if we don't support that, which is a long-term process, this is not something that with a project of like 1 year we're going to solve. This is something that requires like structural changes. So if we invest in that capacity to be able to do the early action, we will really be able to get to the point where we need. And here the cooperation with key partners outside of the humanitarian sector is indispensable. Like we need to talk with the World Bank. We need to talk to like other partners that are going to enable that environment to create that capacity of the local organizations or national organizations or the governments. Then the third point is about the financing. And this is quite exciting because 6 years ago, there was absolutely no funding mechanism that could help us to implement the reactions in the humanitarian system. Like there was absolutely nothing. There was a forecast, we could have the best forecast, but in the Red Cross, we didn't really have the possibility to go and do early action. Now, thanks to the German government and many other governments, we have created the funding mechanisms that any humanitarian organization at the moment, like the Red Cross, Red Crescent, or the UN or the NGOs, can access if there is a forecast to be able to implement early actions. And that's absolutely remarkable. Yet, there is, of course, more that needs to be done on the financing aspect, because it is not only about the funding for the action in itself, but it goes back to my second point. It's about the funding for the whole value chain of early warning and early action, from the production of the early warning systems or impact-based forecasting to the evaluation of the systems and the learning of the systems. So I think that is, and then my last message, and I think the most really important and relevant to all this, is that who are we doing this for? Like this is for the people that is more likely to be impacted by climate and other hazards, and for risks that are not in isolation. We have to look at the population and see all the different risk dimensions that exist, because we're talking about populations that are not only impacted by poverty and inequality, but also now by COVID, and in many cases, populations affected by conflict, but protracted conflict. I mean, this is a topic that I'm very passionate about, is that we need to set up systems for contexts that are affected by conflict, because the conditions are like really, really complex, and we are not ready to be able to do that like properly. And I think the message that you mentioned about displacement, it is a low-hanging fruit that we have in the humanitarian system. And at the moment, we're not able to do properly anticipatory action in IDP camps, for instance, and that's absolutely unacceptable. So I think we have all the cocktail of all the really amazing things that we could do. We have the partnerships, we have the data, we have the funding, we have the willingness. And I think this is the moment of like really bring everything together and make sure that anticipatory action can flourish. Thank you.
Indeed, very convincing, Catalina, and yes, a very clear also work program ahead to make sure that all the things, as I said, we orchestrate them well and we actionize this. And that's why now we have Rickliff, because it's the moment to also look at the actions, how all this information, actions, COP26, willingness, how has this been translated into action in Germany, has been really very convincing and very active in being a strong proponent of anticipatory action, and Catalina said it very well. So what is your point of view?
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me. I'm grateful to the organizers of the conference and grateful to all of you on stage. I do feel like another fish out of the pond, but I'm afraid there's more fish outside than inside the pond. There are many challenges, and all of you on the panel have talked about them so ably, and I don't want to add another layer of challenges to it for all of us to get depressed. But I will mention a few, because with all the practitioners here, of course, there's another political level and a donor level, a government level that we have to think about too, and I will try to explain a little bit what we do and what I think we should be able to do as donors and countries. First of all, yes, Germany has been very active on acting on climate change in many respects. The former governments as well, but the new German government put this as a priority into the coalition agreement, and this involves many, many things inside Germany, how the economy runs, what we do. It involves, obviously, international action, what we do with COP. We already changed and are in the process of doing so, a little bit of government processes, who does what in the government. So my ministry, the foreign ministry, does the climate negotiations now with a view to COP, where it used to be in a different ministry. All of this to say, we're very active on international climate change procedures and negotiations. One aspect, though, that is also a part of our activities is indeed anticipatory action. And Germany this year, as you will know, holds also the G7 presidency, and inside our G7 program and the initiatives that are connected to it, anticipatory action is one part. Now, there's a working group that I chair with the G7 partners that is aiming to put anticipatory action at a higher political level to recognize the concept and give it political push through at leaders level, at foreign ministers level, to show that this is a concept we support as G7 and that we want to act on. Now, there are challenges involved, obviously. You've mentioned a lot on the practical challenges. Data, do we have them? Yes, we have much more than we used to have. We probably even have enough, but do the data concepts and facilities talk to each other, and do the data reach where they need to be on the ground finally? And you talked about this. Are local actors, regional actors able to put it into action, what we know? But on the donor side as well, how can we finance this? Do we have the procedures to do that? Because governments obviously are spending taxpayers' money on humanitarian assistance overall, anything they do really, but on humanitarian assistance, but also on anticipatory action. And there is the question always with anything preemptive and anticipatory. Well, how does this work? What are we spending money on? Is this really coming to pass? And how can we monitor this? So even within the G7 group, we have different systems of procuring money from our parliaments and different systems of reporting. And so we have different needs of showing what we do with the money. So it's not as easy as you may think to say, yes, we need to be more preemptive because it really works. It, in the end, actually saves us money if we act early, because if we know what the impact of the weather will be, then we can do something before the disaster really hits, and that is actually, in the end, cheaper. So the donors do have a big interest to make this work better. At the same time, we need to be able to put systems in practice where all donors know how they work and are able to explain to the public and to their parliaments of how they spend the money. So the idea is straightforward, I think, and is very much something we all have to support. But putting it into practice on government and donor level is another challenge to the very practical things that you have. And I'm not saying this, as I said in the beginning, to get us all depressed. I'm just saying that you need to think about that, and we, governments and donors who want to push this politically and want to make it work, need to work together with all of the community to really get our heads around how do we do this? What are the thresholds? What are the triggers that you use to get going on the ground? And how do we finance this? Where does the money have to be? What does the money go into before a disaster hits? What kind of material do you need where locally? All these questions are out there, and many of them have been discussed for a long time. I agree, it's not all new. But to put this into a higher level document, like a foreign minister's G7 communique, even if only in attached documents, you need to negotiate text on a political level. And that's what we're doing right now, and this is what governments do in finally getting help to people where it should be.
Thank you very much, and really very interesting to bring this political point of view, how things then move, because it's not enough to have the data, to have the science, to have the tools, but we need also to have the political will to support all this. And now we have it, and this is very good news. But let's see what now we can do with all these fishes outside the pond, because it's become challenging now. We must find some fish that belong to the pond now to reply to the questions, because we have questions from the audience here maybe, and also we have some questions here. First of all, I would like to ask if people in the room wants to ask questions. Not really. Then I have one question. The first question that was inserted here in our Slido was linked to somebody who said that they fully agree with the need to insert this capacity of anticipatory action. This is very important. And how is it possible to, you can read it here, to embed it in academic education? Capacity building here too. Who wants to take this question?
I can go ahead. Yeah, so I think this is such a great question, and it's very close to the heart of the work that we're doing at the Climate Center. So yeah, I mean, we need to train the new generations of meteorologists, of risk managers, on for how we can do better early warning systems. And I think the best entry point is to really be able to include this into the curriculums of already existing masters or other type of education levels. So there are some ongoing discussions of how we can start to do this, and I think they're very promising. One that I'm very, very happy about is even within the meteorological world, the UK Met Office, for instance, has a very strong academy for meteorologists, and they want to start to include more the concept of impact-based forecasting, early warning, early action within the trainings that they do for meteorologists. So I think that's a really fantastic starting point into the process. But then we also need to look at on the other side of the equation, for us as humanitarians, we need to increase our knowledge and our capacity to understand basic weather information and climate information and data. So there is a lot of education and learning that has to be also invested in ourselves to be better. But I'm sure you have more ideas.
Yeah, I think you said it very well. There is always an opportunity actually to include this, maybe not formally in the curriculum, but at least having collaboration with the universities so that people who are active in this area, early warning, can give kind of seminars at the university. I remember that I was a research assistant at the university in Louvain-la-Neuve. We used to invite people actually from GRC who were working on fire and other early warning systems. I think these also framed actually my thinking in terms of this. So there is a way to happen. Then there is the part of linking to education systems, academic institutions in developing countries in Africa. I think this is still missing because most of you, when you go to the developing countries, you go to the Ministry of X, Y, and never go to university because university are the poor part of the system. So I think we have to think about how we connect with the academic institution in developing countries.
Also, Carlo wants to intervene on this.
Mine was more of a general point inspired by the discussion. and I was quite keen to reassure some of the panelists of the fact that actually, while the data is being provided, a lot has changed in the setting of the climate services. So I'm lucky and honored to be the chairman of the Partner Advisory Committee of the GFCS. So this is actually an example. So GFCS is the Global Framework for Climate Services, is a WMO initiative that aims at making the climate information more useful on the ground. So in that part of that process, the Partner Advisory Committee is really a mechanism to engage with all these organizations that actually want the data, and the data about climate, information about climate. And it's not just to tell them how to use the data at all. It's very much about hearing what is needed, what is missing. So we were talking about anticipatory action, and you, Alessandra, you were asking at the beginning, example on how the information we provide is used on the ground. And we were discussing about seasonal predictions. So if you look at things such as El Nino, or the possibility of a drought, or even just the heat wave, which may have had an impact of the outcome of the war in Ukraine by making the situation more muddy than it would have been otherwise. Some of these things are predictable months in advance, and we routinely make this information available to everyone. But I want to reassure Francois, it's no longer a tedious and complex interface to get that data, but we really worked hard to make the data, hearing what the different partner organizations wanted, to make that data actually accessible. So if you want to know what the typical condition is in a certain place, or what it will be in a few months, you can do it with a click without knowing much about the underpinning data. And I can show it to you later, or to anyone who's interested. So for me, it's just to acknowledge the fact that while there are still obstacles, and there are many obstacles that needs to be passed, I think a lot has been done, and the situation now is much better and much more receptive on the meteorological and climate side than it was before. One last point, linking to Wycliffe and the German effort on climate is just to acknowledge the fact that part of that effort, we also changed ourselves. We were based in the UK, and now all the climate action within ECNWF actually are based in Bonn. So just an occasion to remark that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we also have Marco still connected. Marco, if you want to intervene, you have to shout, because if we don't see you.
Yes, thank you. The discussion is very interesting, and as well as the presentation by the colleagues. So what I want to say that in CEMET COS and CEMET COS 2 projects, we did a lot of work for young boys in the schools, trying to transfer scientific knowledge into simple words to boys, and also to teachers, because it's very important that teachers can teach to their to the younger the effects of sea level rise in this case. So it was very surprising that interviewing teachers, boys, and also stakeholders, only a few percentage of these people is aware of the effects and the phenomena in general of sea level rise. They all know that climate change is something which is warming the planet or melting the global ice. But even for people who are living along the coast, they don't know, they don't know exactly what is the effect on the sea level. So we started speaking about the coastal erosion, for example, and the tsunamis and the storm surges that can be amplified and will be amplified by climate change. So I think that is really a key point is to transfer knowledge in a simple way to people. And that's why, for example, for students, we set up some serious games that can do on their mobile phones or on the computers to understand the effects. And it's very surprising because now many boys are now much more interested in the phenomena. It's very it's a good way to I think to transfer knowledge to people, because one of the big issues I think is to let the science speak to common people. Normally people when have to face science, they are very scared by complex phenomena or complex systems, so on and so on. But if you go on the beach with the school, sometimes courts and people, and they, hey, this is the coastal erosion because this is caused by climate change, by sea level rise. So they understand very well.
Thank you, Marco. Thank you very much. I absolutely agree that we need to develop tools that are easy to use and that there is visualization of the data capabilities for people to use in a quicker way. And I am a big fan also of the e-learning, and we should use e-learning much more. We have, for example, just published my colleagues' e-learning courses on how to use the GHSL, the Global Human Settlement Layer data, which allows to see population on Earth and built up areas throughout the whole world. And it is very useful for exposure and for many other analyses. And this is now available online and can be used by all practitioners and teachers also. So we should do more of this if we really want to enhance the capacity, as this has been identified as a gap. And we move.
I'm sorry.
No, because there was a question on the citizens, also the role of citizens, and this is very interesting because you referred to involvement of citizens, and we didn't talk about this enough. The last mile, the last mile is very, very important. And there was a question in the chat, but first I have a question here from the audience, and we are going to hear this question first. Please.
Thank you very much. I would like first to thank all our panelists for very interesting, of course, interventions and telling us how accurate and timely data can save lives and can allow societies to organize themselves, adapt better to changing climate. But representing IOM, being the Director General's Special Envoy on Climate Change, I would like as well really to welcome two reflections from John Harding and then Catalina about the fact that these data sometimes do not reach all the populations who would need them, and including more specifically displaced populations. This is, of course, a very serious point, very, very important one. We do rely on national governments mostly, to include displaced populations in their policy, adaptation policies. But I just wanted to underline that we can, or you all can, of course, address yourselves to those who are taking care of displaced persons, like IOM, the International Organization for Migration, is taking care of displaced persons on the grounds. We are here to do the link as well between the local governments or national governments and the displaced persons. And of course, I would I would really be available, this organization is available to work closer to WMM with John Harding, more specifically on cruise, for instance, but as well working, for instance, with any of you on Africa, preparing COP27, maybe including that important point. And I'm thinking, of course, of the G7, and heard that very interesting, working group ahead of COP27, and I hope that G7 will include as well that dimension. Thank you very much.
John wants to react to this.
Thank you, Alessandra, and thank you for the question. A quick reflection on on that point, I mean, we are when we're talking about early warning systems, we do find ourselves caught up sometimes in this, what we call this humanitarian development nexus. So we're in a situation where we're building up capacity in a country of the national institutions, and this happened to us, for example, in Afghanistan recently. So we're working with the National Meteorological Service of Afghanistan, building capacity there to provide warnings for there's many floods and drought that affect the country. Obviously, in the situation that happened over last summer when the Taliban took over, well, first of all the capacity we had been developing in that country. They had to leave their positions. A lot of them had been women. Gender-sensitive programming is one of our central pillars of our work. So we build up a lot of women forecasters in the national systems. They had to leave their positions and so on. So in a way, we had to find new ways of providing those types of services, and that I meant actually working not through the national institutions in this case, and working directly with the international partners and the humanitarian actors in the country. So that's a situation that does occur sometimes. So we had to find ways of providing the same type of, I mean, we call it the winterization situation in Afghanistan is obviously was the first emergency for which we had to provide certain types of predictions and services. And so that I think is an additional example of how we have to be, work very closely with the institutions such as IOM and understand better that interaction. And if I may, Alessandra, there was a question around this citizen science, which I thought was interesting, and the use of early warning of mobile phones. So, and there's one aspect that we haven't really touched upon, but when we talk about early warning systems, it's important that they're not seen in isolation from a broader, spectrum of policies and tools that are available to countries to deal with resilience and adapting to climate change. It's really one tool, and so it's one tool in a broader toolbox, and it shouldn't be seen in isolation from these other approaches and strategies and plans. Sometimes we find, especially from our side, we talk as if we're like a standalone environment. So when you talk about citizens, the citizen science and engagement, there's some good examples where we build in our early warning systems into broader programs in countries which are looking at managing the impact of these kind of events. For example, in Niger, the main threat from floods from the Niger River is in the capital, Niamey. They've got certain of the neighborhoods are very exposed to these regular floods that occur every year. So in order for the national systems, the hydrological institutions and the meteorological institutions to provide the right types of information, we need to understand who are the populations at risk. And there so of course we at WMO, we work mainly with the meteorological services, but in the context of, for example, the initiative that has been mentioned already in this cruise initiative, we work also with the World Bank for the Global Facility for Disaster Reduction and Recovery, with the UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction. So we bring in that expertise and knowledge of the risk analysis from those neighborhoods. And in that case, it's actually, they use mobile phones to identify, they can literally geolocalize the houses which are regularly flooded. So therefore, we can easily build up those maps of the at-risk population, understand, and then build in those systems which sort of, so the warnings are much more targeted and towards those populations that need them. So that's something that we really try and build in. And if you look at the front line now of where a lot of our projects in these countries, often the forecasts and predictions are available. Some of the risk information also is available, but they don't talk to each other. So building these sort of, it's literally data platforms in these countries which allow the authorities to draw on these very advanced prediction services, bring in the risk information around the population that are exposed, so that automatically triggers alerts that are understood. I mean, that's one of the kind of tools that we're seeing a lot of demand for currently from countries, and that we're having to try and put in place. And fortunately, there are countries, there are such capacities available in countries in Europe and so on that we can apply and adapt to the concept of the countries. But as I say, that overline of those data platforms is really something that is sort of the front line of our operations currently.
Thank you very much, Catalina.
Yeah, so I will go back to your point of displacement because it is something that I think from a humanitarian perspective, it is our duty to really figure it out. How do we solve this situation? Because we cannot allow things like what happened in the IDP camps in Syria like 3 months ago, where absolutely all the assets and tents and everything of like millions of people were totally destroyed. I think that's absolutely unacceptable when we have the science, when we know where the people is, and we really need to do something, and we need to set up the systems. Exactly the same happened in Yemen last year, and even personally, I know my first emergency response was in Colombia. I'm from Colombia, was 16 years ago in an IDP population that was totally destroyed by a flash flood. So I think this is something that I think we have to be very strong about, and hopefully from this forum, like we can have some very concrete solutions. Like how do we set up systems, early warning systems for IDP camps, but also for displaced people who is living in cities, who is living in the very high-risk areas in cities, because we know that when a family, a person displaced because of conflict or because of other reasons, they tend to go to the most at-risk areas. So we know where they are, and we need to set up the systems to be able to anticipate that.
Thank you very much, Catalina. And I really like, John, what you said about a toolbox. This is a part of a bigger toolbox, the early warning systems, and there is already a lot of cooperation and collaboration among UN agencies, among researchers and practitioners, and it has to continue like this. Early warning and anticipatory action really can only work if it is a common endeavor and collaboration works properly. But I have at least 3 questions in front of me here talking about anticipatory action. This has really triggered a lot of interest, and in particular there is a question asking how can the EU donors help break the silos and to enable end-to-end early warning system for effective anticipatory action, and the responsibility sits across different ministries. How do you do it? How do you do it in Germany?
I'll answer it with two sentences. No, it's a several million-dollar question, right? Because the things we're talking about are really complex. I mean, my ministry has the funds for humanitarian assistance, and out of that we fund, a lot of action on the ground. We can fund some capacity building, but it can't be the only tool. Just as somebody said in the opening panel yesterday, if you look at the humanitarian community to solve the climate crisis for you, that's not happening. You've got to, at other levels, act against climate change. We're at the end somehow. We're at the fringes. We're dealing with the symptoms. But we need funds too, and so that was the idea, and I totally agreed. So it's, the challenges that we have are really complex, and you can't solve them with just one thing. But better coordination on a government level and whole of government approaches are key. This is true for what we're talking about here now, but it's equally true for something that we see looming now with, we've been in dire waters already as regards humanitarian crises around the world. Now with the war in Ukraine, we're fearing much bigger problems yet for hunger, just availability of grains, the whole thing. And we're not only going to answer it with humanitarian assistance money. We're not, because we can't. We're not going to stem the flood like that. So we need other measures and other instruments. And that, you know that, working in EU institutions, and you all know that, there need to be cooperation between ministries or directorates general, and it's not always easy, but we have to make the effort. And part of it, though, is about capacity building with amongst ourselves, but on many, many levels. And I want to just mention one initiative, which is the Complex Risk Analysis Fund, an initiative that we, with other donor countries and the UN, have set up for what it says to get better data and coordinate capacity building with countries and states so that governments have better data. We are lucky enough to have instruments in the German Foreign Ministry that does open data analysis for climate risks, other risks as well. So we have a basis at hand ourselves. Not everybody has that, but we're willing to share it. And that's why we're putting money into this UN fund so that others can have part in that kind of knowledge as well. I'm just mentioning it because I think capacity building on many levels is important. Governments, but all the way down to the operational level. One final word, maybe. I'm sorry I have to leave a bit early, but I can assure you it's for a good cause, a top donors lunch, where we need to talk about how do we broaden the donor base and to have money to do the things that we need to do. I don't leave the panel depressed, despite the challenges, but encouraged, really, because it shows everything that you all talked about, how many tools we have at hand, that we have the instruments, and it's as probably more a matter of connecting them and making them talk to each other and work together, rather than inventing new stuff. I mean, we need new elements for sure, but we're much further than we were 10 years ago, or even 5 years ago. That's for sure. So I think we can all be encouraged by that.
Very encouraging, thank you. And also by now you have become a fish of the pound, so very good.
Can I swim on to the next event? Thank you.
Yes, and thank you very, very, very much for having enlightened us with all these difficult considerations from a political point of view and governmental point of view. So thank you very much. Thank you. But we still have a few minutes to go, and now I want to we go closer to the wrap-up. And we have discussing a lot. We have been hearing a lot about what exists, and also we have been talking about gaps, and some gaps, how to fill these gaps. Now, in a few minutes, we will have our lunch. So I want to use this example to see what exactly can be done better. Imagine that we have all the ingredients now to cook our lunch. And we have heard that we have the data, that we have the algorithms, that we have the models, that we have the tools, that we have the political will, that we have the actions, that we have the funds, that we have the international willingness to act, that we have the citizens' willingness to be involved. We really have all the ingredients. But we still have people dying because of natural hazards, and here I'm not going to talk about conflicts. It's even more clear today, conflicts. But let's talk about natural hazards only. And we had examples even in Europe and very recently. So there is room for improvements. So I would like to hear from you, and also I want to challenge a bit people sitting in the room here. You can also ask for the floor and intervene. What is then needed to cook our good lunch? Because we are hungry, eh? Lunch is approaching. So what is needed? And these are also the takeaways, because these round tables and these events are useful if we can then have some conclusions that can help us to advance and improve. And I think that the organizers of this huge event, 3 days event, are expecting us to produce some concrete ideas. Very good. Who wants to start with cooking? Marco is ready to start.
Well, I should say that probably the best way is to choose the right ingredients. So in the good parts, in percentage, to do this. First, is necessary, in my opinion, to have a full analysis of the available data, and then to change this data to put this data in the kitchen, to use in the kitchen, using part of all the other data to try to integrate them with an output that is a powerful output for people, for all people, not only for just a part of people, for us or for technicians or for scientists, but for common people. This is probably because all people should be able to eat and be happy at what eating.
Very good integration and involvement of people.
Good integration, yeah. Good integration and transfer to change the output, and the integration is a key result that can be easily transferred to common people.
Excellent, thank you very much. Who wants to intervene from here? Carlo?
Yeah, maybe at cost of playing once more the card of the fish, I would think that it's a matter of, a lot of recipe I like are coming together when you have different people with different expertise sharing their own recipe and putting ingredient together. So for me, it's like bringing the fish to a landlocked country and showing them how to cook and learning from them and generating something new. And that for me is Catalina mentioned it, is the key of co-design. So that's really what is needed. We have the ingredient. We have climate data at your fingertip. You can have it on your mobile phone. You don't need a supercomputer. You don't need specific expertise. You can have it. And we have the funding, we have the knowledge, we have the mechanism. So let's get together, let's work together and co-design what is missing. And I think on our side, on the climate data provider side, we have never been as receptive as we are now to the needs of these new users, the users that are not familiar with the climate data. So for me, it's really getting to the kitchen together, sharing our own ingredient and inventing a fantastic recipe.
For a moment, I thought you wanted to eat the fish.
I thought about it. I thought it was a bit too much.
I think it's a bit too much. No, but very good. So innovation, collaboration, and co-design are your ingredients. Do I understand well? Yeah. Good. John, what about you?
I would probably add two elements to your menu. One, you mentioned the loss of life. Actually, there's an encouraging trend there, is the fact that the loss of life to extreme event, to disasters, is actually trending down globally. And it has been for a while, and it's because we have these better capacities the predictions are better, the systems in place to alert and warn populations. However, that trend is not universal, and there are a number of countries, so LDCs and SIDS, that trend is actually reversed. So the risk of losing life is going up in those countries. So for me, I think that still is a central component of that is an unacceptable fact. But it's one that can be addressed. Tomorrow's the World Meteorological Day, and the UN Secretary General Guterres will make an announcement in the context of that day to call for scaled-up action in the build-up to COP27 on early warning with a focus on Africa. So we have a good opportunity here I really see an opportunity here to further bridge that capacity gap collectively and building on the principles that were mentioned. And the second aspect of the menu, I'll add to the list that you mentioned, and I think this notion of people-centered approaches to early warning, it links to co-production, it links to risk, understanding of risk and so on. But I think it's a central element of the effectiveness of our systems moving forward.
Thank you very much, John. So for you, people-centered approach and collective action. Francois.
Thank you. Okay, I'll try to add some paper on the menu. And I was speaking from the perspective of developing countries. I think what we see is actually the needs to build strong institutions that can provide this ordering system to people. I think in developing countries, you have very strong institution in terms of meteorological forecast, and also the meteo information is broadcast quite easily. But in developing countries, sometimes the meteo services are poorly funded, and usually people don't trust the information coming from those services. And that is a big challenge. So now, but today, those services can have also leverage on the collaboration with external services, other services, and then provide more accurate information. But they need to be recognized as institutions providing authoritative information. This being said, I think also we have to keep an eye open to citizen science, any science somehow. Because we have discovered that sometimes when information is made, data is made available, publicly available, individual people can actually build interesting systems that other institutions can pick up and then reuse for reaching the people with the right information. I think this is important. The last thing is not only forecasting how much rain, but what is going to be the impact. I think this is very important so that people understand the danger they're facing. If it's about in an IDP camp, so people can understand that there is a danger coming, and then people can try to act beforehand.
Very interesting what you said about building trust, gaining trust for this information and for science also, and also involving the people, of course. Catalina.
Good, so I'm going to invite to our lunch our 14 million volunteers of the Red Cross, plus the thousands and thousands of local organizations that will play the key role to really translate early warnings into early actions. And I think the key message is that to make that happen, we need to invest on those capacities. Like, this is not just going to fall from the sky. Like, we really need to make sure that every volunteer, every local organization learn how to use the data, has the technical capacities to go to the field and actually do the actions, that we can overcome the logistics and the complexities of being able to actually go to the field and do what we need to do. So I think that is definitely my key message, that we do have the people, we do have the systems, you know? We just need to channel in a very well-coordinated way all the different efforts that we have to be able to help the people. And then maybe a last message that is very important is that there is a lot of knowledge that we have on early warning and early action. I mean, I'm saying that we have been doing this for years and years and years. There is just so much. There is a wealth of ideas that we can adapt to different contexts. And I think that's why I'm really excited about what we have created with the Anticipation Hub. It's just such a wonderful space, because it's there where we're able to share, to exchange, and to develop further this knowledge on anticipatory action. Thank you.
Absolutely, it is absolutely true. And with this enthusiasm, I'm sure we could have a lot of excellent results. Let's see if somebody wants to add any ingredient to our lunch from the audience here, please. Mike. Yes. Sir, wait for the mic, otherwise people will not hear you online.
It's just, I'm quite surprised. I'm really interested and I learn a lot. And I'm a Red Crescent member as volunteer, ex-professional. I'm really surprised that I think in our recipe, one thing is missing is governmental, national authorities, local authorities, traditional authorities, and government. This is a problem on the field, actually. This is the people who decide where to put the refugee camps. And even if you send experts on climate, experts on geomorphology of the field, they will tell you, no, I will not give you the nice piece of land. You have to put your refugee here, where everybody knows, or there is a lack of water to drink, or there is too much water flowing. And this is the same everywhere. And this will be the same in terms of climate impact. Meaning, if you say to poor people, don't go to this place because you will see your housing destroyed every year, okay, fair enough. offer them another place where to go. But who is the owner of this other place? Rich people, from the government or from the traditional leader or from the XYZ leaders. So yes, of course, we have the data now, and this is a big win. We have a forecast-based solution, and this is really fantastic evolution. We have people transforming complex data for humanitarian use, and this is really nice. Okay, maybe some kind of political willingness at a higher level, or I don't know. Connected to peace, also peace building, maybe.
Yes, absolutely. I agree on the applause. Very, very nice. Thank you. Very important to mention this. And also important to maybe to draw from what you said, the conclusion that we need to work more also with local authorities and do more awareness raising at that level. And we should mention, and also social justice in the way, and fairness in the way this is treated. A lot of these hazards will impact the local level. This is a really global issue which will request a lot of action at the local level. So we really need to work a lot with the authorities, and very often they don't have the capacity, they don't have the money, and they don't have the skills to intervene. Sometimes it's not even a question of bad will, but it's a question of not being able to be better. So very important, and we then add this also to the equation. And if you allow, I would like to add my ingredient. I think we will have a very fantastic lunch. We are really ready, and the dish is very nice. I can already see it. If I may add the final parmesan, Italian parmesan, on this pasta that we have cooked, I would say that we need to mainstream anticipatory actions in many other policies. So all these fishes in the pound now have to go out. They cannot stay in the pound. And go out and make sure that anticipatory is mainstream in all our actions, because it really impacts in very many different sectors, and there is so need to look at this not only from humanitarian risk or civil protection, but in all fields and in all policies. And with this, perfectly on time, we close this session and we can go for lunch. And thank you very much to the speakers, to the organizers, to the public here. Thank you.